The world as we know it changed in one moment nearly 60 years ago. Most of us aren't even old enough to have witnessed or remember what happened back on July 20th, 1969, but you definitely remember this from your history class. One person taking one small step changed not only the world, but in some ways changed the entire course of history. At 2:56 a.m., American astronaut Neil Armstrong planted his foot on the surface of the moon, marking the very first time in human history that we Earthlings tread on soil not our own. The implications of this one small step led to several giant leaps for mankind. It meant that America won the space race versus the Soviet Union in the height of the Cold War. It also showed us what human technology and innovation was capable of if we just put our minds to it. But it also catapulted our dreams of possibilities, because if we could send someone to the moon, there's almost nowhere our dreams couldn't take us. One small step propelled us as a human race to think in terms of what could be in our future rather than what has been or what currently is. In our study of the book of Joshua this week, we're actually in chapter 3. The Israelites have been on the outside of the promised land, or Canaan, readying for conquest. This is the moment that Israel's been waiting for 40 years. They've been wandering for 4 decades, waiting for permission to enter into the promised land, because God had promised this land to Abraham all the way back in Genesis chapter 15, and then again to his servant Moses. Then in Joshua chapter 1, God told Joshua that he was giving this land to Israel. He reminded them of the promise that he had made to his people. But promise and possession are two entirely different things. You could promise me an all-expenses-paid trip to Hawaii, but until I'm surrounded by palm trees and putting my feet in the sand, all I have are high hopes and dreams. I've got nothing. This is what Israel had so far. Nothing. They had a dream without a deed. But we also know that God is good on his promises. If he said it will be, it will come to be. If you look back at 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 56, it says, "Blessed be the Lord who has given rest to his people Israel, according to all that he promised. Not one word has failed of all his good promise, which he spoke by his servant Moses." And I'm sure those were words of comfort to Israel in the midst of uncertain times. But they're comforting to us today as well. But here's the deal. Yes, God makes good on his promises to his people Israel all those years ago. And yes, God makes good on his promises to us today as well. But some of his promises are also conditional. There's a lot of big ifs, big thens, and then some big buts attached to some of his promises. God says, if you'll do this, then I'll do that. But if you don't do this, then I won't do that. The promise of the deed to Canaan was a conditional promise. It had stipulations attached to it. God wanted to give them every acre of land he originally promised. The big but was that Israel had to take some small steps. Those were metaphorical steps, but they were also literal steps as well. They had to literally take a step of formation. That meant consecrating themselves and forsaking sin so that they could step into the promised land clean. They had to take some steps of faith. They had to actually dip their feet into the Jordan River. Now, this might not sound like that big of a deal to us, but I want you to understand that most of the year, the Jordan River was really only about 100 feet wide. But during the rainy spring season, the river would be at flood stage, and it expanded to over a mile wide. That is a massive body of water that millions of people had to cross. It's almost as if God timed this crossing perfectly so as to show how powerful he really is to his people. Somewhere between 2 and 3 million people would need to cross the Jordan River. The only solution was a set of miracles. One, that God would stop that kind of river flow and make it possible for them to walk across on dry land. And 2, that Israel would actually have the faith to claim God's promise by stepping out. And then 3, Israel also had to take a step of following. And what we know is that when the Levitical priests passed by the people and the people saw the Ark of the Covenant of God, they were to follow it across the Jordan River. As soon as the priests stepped foot into the Jordan River, the river stopped raging. It actually stopped upstream somewhere near a small town called Adam. Joshua chapter 3 verse 17 says this, "Now the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan." Israel showed that they were willing to get their feet wet in faith. God showed he was capable of fulfilling his promise in faithfulness. Now, what does this mean for you? It means that in order to see God do the miraculous, you have to first take a step of preparation. Joshua told the people in this chapter to consecrate themselves because they were about to witness the wonders of God right before them. That meant that they had to be clean. They had to clean themselves up and be ready for God's holiness to pass in front of them, and also for what God had in store for them in the future. They couldn't have the filth of sin in their life. So you need to consecrate yourself. Take a bath. I had a Bible college professor years ago that would always say to incoming freshmen, young men, he would say, "Gentlemen, take a bath." So take a bath, a spiritual bath. Invest in your spiritual formation and your sanctification so you are right with God and ready for whatever God is going to do in and through you. Also, you got to step into the water. Until you step out in faith and get your feet wet, you're not going to get very far in your walk with the Lord. If you want to get close to the other side of whatever Jordan or whatever obstacle is standing right in front of you, you're going to have to take one small step. And maybe one small step is all you can give. A life of walking with God often starts with a single step of faith. When you determine to put one foot in front of the other with some very small steps, you're going to start to see how God's giving you the faith for future leaps. So take a step into the waters of faith. Then take a step toward his presence. The Ark of the Covenant symbolized the presence of God, and it went into the water before anyone else in Israel ever did. Remember, these people had never been this way before. They needed guidance across the Jordan and into Canaan. When we take one small step of faith into the Jordan, it leads to a life of following his presence. And his presence is a powerful and a terrifying thing. Israel was actually cautioned not to get within about 2,000 cubits of the Ark of the Covenant. And in case you need a refresher on ancient measuring techniques, 2,000 cubits is about the equivalent of, say, 1,000 yards, so it'd be like 10 football fields. If you'll step out in faith, God is going to lead you to places unknown. Because in life, you can't always know where you're going if you've never been there before. You need his presence to guide you into the unknown. So follow him, not only into the Jordan, but let him lead you across the Jordan or across those places where you've never imagined before. So the next time we come up to our personal Jordans or those obstacles that stand in our way, let's be the kind of people that remember Joshua chapter 3, that God not only wants to lead us into it, he wants to lead us across those obstacles and across those Jordans into the promised land, if we'll just take one small step.